Tra pochi giorni,
in a few days, we're going to celebrate the 10th anniversary from 9/11, 2001. We're going to be forced to recall that date because that is one of the dates that, together with some other dates, we would be ruled out, cancelled from the calendar. We knew that from that day on, something changed in history. There's something like before 9/11 and after 9/11. This decade was marked by wars and destruction and massacres. And one way or the other, everything in a way refers to that 9/11. Everything has been extremely difficult throughout this decade. Relationship amongst religions, dialogue between cultures, the very relationship amongst men. But we could state with immense certainty that the meeting has gone on keeping up the tradition of fostering meeting amongst people of different backgrounds, of different cultures. The meeting has always encouraged talking to each other, even before thousands and thousands of people, or such a very large audience of people, very attentive, and as a matter of fact, thanks to such an attentive audience. So we, at the meeting, withstood. There are those who want to close off doors, to keep diversity distinct, and create a wall between them and us. And unlike what somebody may think, unlike what maybe a lot think, our experience is marked by a clear identity that opens up ourselves to the other, because we're always ready to take upon our walk together with other people in an open manner, with an open mind. Our experience, our identity is strong enough to run risks because we don't pass any ideological judgment. And with strength and continuous effort, day after day, year after year, I've always worked out a yarn that connects me to the other side of the Mediterranean. We've been very close to our friends, the Christians on the other side of the Mediterranean that have often been prosecuted. We've been also close to the Arab world and to the Islam religion. And indeed, we had a wonderful experience that is named Meeting Cairo. A few months ago, together, we were very much taken aback by what happened in Tunisia and Egypt. The contagion was diffused in the whole Arab world. No economist, no minister, no president of banks had anticipated the financial crisis, or at least we hadn't been told. Similarly, no political leader, no financial analyst, no international organization leaders had imagined events that changed the Middle East and the Mediterranean forever. Such events are still underway and are taking different directions. Indeed, we're learning about what is happening in Libya, Syria. We hear about the tensions that are developing all over in the region. What is happening is indeed a challenge. And this is indeed the title that we've given to this meeting, a challenge for knowledge, a challenge for politics, a challenge for reason, a challenge for the heart. We're grateful we are here together, and we'd like to express our grateful with the meeting and with a historical friendship with Italian Foreign Minister, Mr. Frattini, whom we'd like to welcome here once again.
lo accogliamo qui ancora una volta.
We're very pleased to welcome him again. We feel very joyful and expectant as the first time he came quite a number of years ago. So again, welcome back, Minister Frattini. We did walk a long way together along the past years. We walked this way together with Antonella Mularoni, the Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs of the Republic of San Marino, whom she's here. who is here, and she's going to talk to us shortly. I'd like to introduce to you now a guest that has never been at the meeting. We can even call him a friend of the meeting, even if he's here for the first time. His name is Tarak Ben Ammar. He doesn't want to be referred to as president, professor, president, or anything else. And he indeed may boast quite a number of titles thanks to his career. Ben Ammar is a top delegate or the top representative in the Arab world. He's from Tunisia. He lives in Paris. He's a cosmopolitan. He's an entrepreneur at 360 degrees. I would like to introduce the friends of the meeting once again, Professor Wael, Farouq. Professor Farouq is vice president of so-called cousins meeting Cairo. In his biography, many universities are referred to, and I'm not going to list all the universities he's been holding a chair at, both in Italy, America, and Egypt. He's now a professor at the American University in Cairo. Last but not least, I'd like to introduce somebody who's not here, the General Secretary of the Arab League, Mr. El Arabi, who couldn't come to the meeting because of the recent developments in the region. I'd like to refer to him all the same because the Secretary of the Arab League, he's indeed very sorry he couldn't be with us today, and to bear witness to his sorrow, and because he attached the greatest importance to this meeting, sent to us his contribution that I'm going to read later on, a very important contribution indeed. Now I'd like to start the meeting. First of all, I'd like to give the floor to Mrs. Mularoni, the Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs of the Republic of San Marino, and I'd like to invite her to address the audience. Thank you.
Signora Presidente del meeting,
President of the Rimini meeting, ladies and gentlemen. The Rimini meeting, which has been steadily growing over the years, also thanks to the interest of the international political world, of the intellectuals, and more in general, of all those that have culture dear and culture and comparison dear, has become one of the most important events internationally. The Republic of San Marino, which ever since its beginning has always been a friend of the Rimini meeting, has always attempted and striven to testify to the same values that are promoted here. Therefore, it is a great pleasure and honor to welcome you on behalf of the government of San Marino, which is dealing with one of the most topical issues of the current times. My little country, maybe because it's small, it's a tiny country, over its long-standing history has always believed in the strength of dialogue, democracy, and the respect of the other, without ever losing sight of the fact that even in difficult times, that only an approach based on these values could lead to lasting results, also in terms of peaceful coexistence of the peoples. The historic event which have marked the recent months and that are still very topical in many countries of Northern Africa and the Middle East have taken us by surprise for the quickness of how they happen, and where the desire of freedom exploded in all those countries. So the external observers thought that these countries appear to be very little interested in achieving levels of freedom, democracy, and social justice similar to those of the Northern Hemisphere. All that happened requires us to be aware as international community of the absolute need to take into account globally these countries and to find the best possible solutions to the problems that concern us all. The widening gap between rich and poor countries, and within single countries, the need to promote democracy as the regime that has to be promoted in all the countries, and the accompanying of these youngest nations to consolidate their democratic structures, and then the dialogue between cultures and religions. The part of the world which has enjoyed the longest periods of well-being and growth, peace and democracy is called upon to sustain these countries as long as they want it in the not easy task of to accompany these countries in which are going through difficult situations and where the citizens have been deprived of these values and all the benefits that we've enjoyed. Today, also, this wasn't true. There are strong requests for self-determination and genuine democracy that go hand in hand with the hope of a better life and a fair share of the resources. For the entire West, maybe due to the current recession and downturn, maybe it doesn't look like the best moment in time to tackle the challenges that are affecting other areas, but this is absolutely necessary. Time has come to share that huge ideal heritage that is distinctive of Western culture and which has allowed, ever since the post-war period, to guarantee growth and development of their peoples, to support the primacy of the rule of law and the prevalence of democracy as the only genuine factors which allow citizens to be part of the community. Safeguard of basic rights of citizens and peoples as a fundamental instrument to guarantee a true and harmonious development of the populations. Only thus, also what is called in the title the challenge for North Africa, only thus will we be able to win the challenge. Europe in particular has international organizations that can help and overcome the current problems. The Council of Europe, for instance, is the ideal institution to accompany these countries in their fight for democracy, rule of law and safeguard of fundamental freedoms. The Council of Europe in the 90s greatly contributed to these new emerging democracies in the former Eastern Europe, and now the same help can be given to the new emerging democracies, especially Africa, which is close to Europe in many respects. This was also at the center of discussion at the recent ministerial meeting in Istanbul last May, where it has been established how important it is for Europe to provide all possible help to Africa to achieve stability and development, and this will contribute to avoid mass migrations from that continent to Europe. Moreover, I've always been of the conviction that what is happening, and this further confirmation scheme, but is happening in North Africa and Middle East, that true stability can only be achieved whenever at least basic standards of freedom, democracy and the respect of basic rights are achieved. Where stability and rights are interpreted as one against the other, then we may elude ourselves. Maybe for decades these countries have reached a level of stability that is enough to guarantee the geopolitical balances in the world. But this would be an illusion, as I said, because the wish of the population to achieve those values that belong to the human nature will prevail, and sooner or later you will have to come to terms, sometimes with very high costs, also in terms of human lives. Madam President and dear speakers, this is just a short welcome. Now the invited guests will talk about their direct experience, the experience of those who either lived or are still living, that have experienced or lived in the specific area. Nevertheless, I would like to repeat the common joint commitment of the international community to support the democratization processes that are going on and all the related matters. We all hope that tragedies such as the humanitarian catastrophe that is afflicting the Horn of Africa will never happen again. The African continent must be supported in a positive approach Otherwise, genocide, famine, creeping desertification, and the explosion of social tension due to the unfair distribution of wealth will inevitably continue to develop with very serious consequences that the West cannot accept. So I wish you all success for this meeting, strongly promoted by my colleague, Minister Frattini. I would like to renew the contribution of the Republic of San Marino, and I can guarantee that my country will continue to give its support to the meeting, as it has always done over the years, in support of the ideals that are advocated here, and hopefully to achieve the objective that we all would like to achieve for a better world. Thank you very much.
Grazie. E ora, come dicevo,
Thank you. Now, as I said, I'm going to write the contribution because it is not a message, it's not a letter, but it's a true contribution that Dr. Nabil Eraba Abi, the General Secretary of the League of Arab States, has sent to us that couldn't come. Please allow me to start this topic by pointing out that the 21st century, under the influence of globalization and the revolution in telecommunication, should have ushered throughout the world a system of good governance. Many developing nations in Africa, Asia, and Latin America have attained, or at least strive to attain, this objective. The stark exception was the Arab region. The people in many Arab countries were living under heavy-handed political systems. Popular uprising in the Middle East and North Africa led to the euphoria of the Arab Spring, which has now given way to anxiety. What comes next? What shape will these difficult transitions in Egypt and Tunisia take? How will the developments in Syria and Libya end? What role will the different political shades, the liberals, the Islamists, etc., play? The shape of the transition in Tunisia and Egypt, which will be holding elections soon, is still vague. The repressive and corrupt authoritarian regimes of President Ben Ali and Hosni Mubarak are gone, thanks to the energy, passion, and persistence of the younger generation, familiar with the power of the social media. But building institutions of democracy, structures for economic growth, and welfare, education, development, and the rule of law represent a great challenge and will take time, effort, and dedication to materialize. Arab Spring movements in Yemen, Syria, and Libya are not proceeding as they did in Egypt and Tunisia. In these parts, democratic transition will have to wait, for they must first simply survive the process. In Libya, we have witnessed important development following the no-fly zone decreed by the UN Resolution 1972. The demonstrators are finally and well-deservedly very close to ousting the suppressor for the last 40 years and are facing serious transformation challenges in the aftermath of a free Libya. In Syria, the situation is different. Its strategic location and the prospects of sectarian strife and extremism are the primary reason that demand a different approach, such as the unilateral sanctions imposed by the US and contemplated by the European Union. Even though we are witnessing firmer stances by other Arab countries in the region, as the Arab Spring enters its 8th month, it faces challenges, but also presents opportunities. The democratic wave has already begun to change the Middle East's political landscape. Some aspects of the Arab Spring and their significance for stability in the Mediterranean cannot be completed without identifying its historical perspectives. Though the roots extend to older times, the years 1945-1948 were particularly critical when, at that time, democratization was a principal Arab aspiration. And to be true, some Western powers, though in varying degrees, were not against the process. However, the West failed on 3 counts. The first was not paying sufficient attention to the complex social and economic dynamic then prevailing in the Arab societies. Then was what amounted to be a conspiratorial approach towards Palestine, and here we need not repeat the known facts prior to the establishment of Israel in 1948. And third, the Western drive for military alliance in the Middle East was associated with conditions that were not acceptable to Arabs committed to reform and progress. They called the revolution season in the Arab world as the Arab Spring. Spring in Egypt is full of sandstorms, which make it a less than pleasant season, with its share of bumps reflecting difficulties that could slow progress but never block its inevitable flow. We're faced with the revival of nationalism based on a newfound pride. A democratic Egypt will reassert its influence as a solid partner in the Middle East. The process manifests itself as part of a global political awakening, a movement for change that is enabled and accelerated by modern technology. But it is also comparable to some other periods of revolutionary change in modern history. The name of the game in the Arab world is change. As Arab Spring unfolds at different speeds in different countries, Arab governments must resort to genuine reform. Arabs deserve freedom, security and prosperity, accompanied by social justice and development. A democratic era promises to give the Arab world a chance to be the author of its own actions. It will also enable Arabs to develop a new paradigm for relations with the West, based on equality and partnership. Egypt, in particular, is decisive. It has roughly 25% of the population of the Arab world, and it was for much of the 20th century the region's engine of modernization. If democracy succeeds in Egypt, other countries will follow. Should the democratic experiment in Egypt be derailed by the anti-democratic forces, the revolution will fail to give birth to a democratic system, which was indeed its aim. 2 things that post-revolutionary Egypt urgently needs are to reinvigorate its economy and return to full security. Both issues are vital for the ongoing success of the revolution. The Arab Spring in Tunisia, Egypt and other countries will continue to face daunting problems. Libya, Yemen and Syria each represent unique challenges, but change toward reform is inevitable. These Arab processes will each evolve at its own pace, but they will need an international economic policy to support their political aspiration at this moment of sweeping change. There should be a new Euro-Arab partnership for democratization based on providing support for Arab demands. As they move to build democratic institutions, the international community can support the Arab Spring through opting to exert effort in the path of conflict resolution of the Arab-Israeli conflict rather than conflict management. What is needed now is to end the conflict so that both Israelis and Palestinians can finally enjoy peace and security. For almost 20 years, the option of negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians were frustrated by Israel's adamant refusal to budge on key issues. Resuming such negotiations on the same old basis is sure failure. The Israeli strategy is based on losing, or rather maybe gaining time, depending on the points of view, so as to systematically change, contrary to international law, the facts on the ground to ensure that the creation of a viable Palestinian state becomes impossible. The Arab Spring has shed the light on the new rising Arab public opinion that has been freed from the oppression of its rulers. Only a just, lasting, comprehensive resolution to the Arab-Israeli conflict will curb their rising anger and quest for peace. The National Reconciliation Agreement in Palestine between Fatah and Hamas that was signed in Egypt on May 3rd is one of the major results of this sea of change. Other substantial developments are certain to follow. The Palestinians must be presented with an initiative to return to the negotiation table with a view to ending the conflict on the basis of two-state solution. The international community must support and recognize Palestinian referral to the United Nations, which would pave the way to the internationally agreed upon agreement upon the two-state solution of two countries that have the same birth certificate in the General Assembly Resolution 10181 of November 29, 1947. Attempting to resolve the Arab-Israeli conflict could only support the Arab Spring in their democratization effort and would provide the necessary advocate for these effort. Resuming such for these efforts to succeed into a role model for democracy in the region. The Arab world stands firm in its offer for peace, as summarized by the Arab Peace Initiative. Thank you. We really wanted to read the whole of the contribution as if Dr. Nabil El Arabi were here, given its importance, its depth. It certainly deserved our attention and speculation. I'd like to invite Minister Frattini to take the floor.
Certamente ancora una volta
Thank you very much. Once again, it's for me a great, great honor, privilege being here. I said it many times, repeatedly. I met you many times. We have open meetings together with Professor Guarnieri, with Roberto Fontolan. So the Rimini meeting, as usual, is the meeting of the excellence of the Italian system, of the Italian country, which once a year really allows us to be here and talk with peace of mind, but also with depth about values, ideas, and principles that are that revolve around the human being. So this is a valuable resource for Italy, and I thank you very, very warmly from the bottom of my heart, because I really hope this experience goes on year after year and takes on an ever greater meaning. Now, this year, being here to talk about the Arab Spring, talk about challenges in the Mediterranean. We've just heard the text about the new secretary of the Arab League. We shall be listening soon to Mr. Tarak Ben Ammar and Professor Farouq. So again, yet another opportunity of being able to discuss about a topic which inevitably will be at the center of our attention, not only for the next weeks, but also for the next years, will be one of the main challenges for the entire world. Now, these days, obviously, we're all looking with anxiety at this at the end of the Libyan crisis. Hopefully, we'll be able to avoid a bloodbath, to avoid that too much blood is shed, and to avoid that the final turn is into civil war. We're doing it hopefully that all those that have committed crimes will be captured and obviously put in the hands of the International Tribunal. But in the meantime, day after day, we are confronted with the horrors, really, of this dreadful crisis. We all read the news, watch the images. At least 20,000 people killed by the regime. We find mass graves. We come across strategies, well-organized strategies to have thousands of desperate people escaping to Europe on boats And this is like a retaliation on the part of the regime against us. And also we see the terrified faces of children, maybe 13 or 14 years old, that are recruited as mercenary, as soldiers. Gaddafi would force this, and then they were sent to African countries, very often dying. In many other cases, the responsible have been arrested, so their life is saved. But on terrified children who would go to other countries for just for a bunch of dollars to use arms and to, because they're, exploited by the regime. And also, we think that the resolution by the United Nations and the international mission in that area, we have a bit more of clarity, and we can see a perspective for Libya where rights will be eventually guaranteed, instead of a Libya where Benghazi or Misurata no longer exist because they've been completely destroyed by tanks and by the Air Force. So gradually we can think about a slightly better future, and gradually we can think of what we would call, together with the Arab Spring, as a positive epidemics, the epidemics of hope, of enthusiasm, which bit by bit has been extending to millions of young people. Now the effects remain to be seen. Nabil Arabi said in his intervention, luckily for us, suffice it to look at the Syrian crisis, the latest, and then the latest part of the Libyan crisis, and certainly this first initial step, this first initial enthusiasm, which marked the end of negative cycles that people hope that would never have started. Anyway, I hope that the spark, the beginning, and Tarak Ben Ammar knows it much better than any one of us. The spark, the initial spark of this Arab Spring was an unprecedented event. 10 years after the slaughter of the 11th of September, a very young and poor Tunisian, a young man, instead of becoming a kamikaze and killing other people, he killed himself to protest against injustice, in a very symbolic gestures to appeal to the young and the older in his country, and appeal to dignity. This was the word behind his gestures, and which pushed that very unfortunate man to kill himself and appeal for his own right to dignity and his own right to happiness, to have a normal life. So for himself and for his family. So he did not protest by killing other people, he protested by committing this terrible gesture against himself, by taking his own life. This was the spark which started in the Arab world the upheaval and the uprising of thousands of young people, majority of whom educated, now requesting a new way of life, a new quality for their life. So for all of us, an historic moment with unexpected events. Until then, we had a framework of certainties, but how very often do human people have certainties, and then all of a sudden are these certainties disrupted or shattered? Somebody in the West had even thought there could be countries, that there could be peoples whose destiny it was, for historical reasons or for cultural reasons, that their destiny was to remain forever excluded or kept at the margins of the achievements of democracy and progresses, things that we have been enjoying for a very long time in Europe, we, the happy few in the West. Somebody in the West thought that for those people, for those undemocratic regimes, could be the only possible alternative. This, I think, is a serious responsibility on the part of the West. The West is guilty of this. Sometimes it was just short-sightedness. Sometimes it was deliberate. It was deliberate. We have to say this very frankly. We have to be critical against ourselves and tell the truth and say that very often we went for partnerships of convenience instead of partnership based on genuine coexistence. We thought that autocratic regimes would have been a better protection against terrorism, would have been in a better position to block the flow of illegal migration, would have guaranteed a better cooperation with the West. And then all of a sudden, one day, we woke up to the news of that young Tunisian man committing suicide, and all of a sudden we had to understand that those dictatorships were absolutely unstable, were shaky. And today we're paying the price of not having understood earlier that that thirst for freedom, that thirst for rights was genuine, and it had been there for a very long time for many, many young people who had never had the opportunity to express their desires. I think that for even maybe only for this reason, and although to remedy the mistake made so far and the short-sightedness of the West, then we have the moral duty to be on the side of these young people in this riots and this upheaval in the Arab world. For this only reason we are supposed to do this, and maybe in them, if we are genuine and sincere, they will understand and appreciate. So this awakening, this spring, had another impact on deep-rooted convictions in those very countries at the center of the riot. Think, for instance, of those dictatorships that were really dancing happily prior to the explosion of the crisis. They thought they had combated against terrorism, which was first of all in their own interest. They thought that this was enough to keep them safe from the revolution and the upheaval of peoples who were requesting certainly not only to help terrorism, to combat terrorism, and at the same time to give them rights and democracy. Well, those dictators were firmly convinced that their power would never, never have been put into question. But this too has changed. This has changed sometimes dramatically and suddenly, in a matter of few days, or sometimes in a matter of a couple of months, of violent clashes and casualties, loss of human lives, innocent human lives. But I can talk to you about my own personal experience, because I had understood things very early to some extent. A couple of Arab friends tell me, you as an Italian, you understand better than other people what's going on in the Arab world. I was on Square Tahrir at the beginning of February, one of the first Western colleagues of mine, to try and understand, to try and see what was going on in the Tahrir Square. And in Tunisia, a couple of days prior to my meeting with the caretaker government, and I had been there many times before. Well, on those streets and on those squares, I met people of all ages, university teachers, scholars, researchers, whom, they were not simply asking something against somebody, they were requesting democracy, economic development, dignity, rights, rule of law. Well, on those squares are here, none of us, simply by looking at the TV, none of us saw the American flags being burned or the Israeli flags being burned. We haven't seen a strong protest against the West. Those were young people on Tahrir Square, and I was there when the police had already gone, and I saw through my own eyes, Professor Tarak knows it very well, he knows what I'm talking about. I saw that synagogue on the square, which was no longer protected, but not because the police agents, police officers were not there, but because the young people didn't even dare to touch that synagogue. That synagogue was protected because there was the risk of terrorism. And then, after the the upheaval and the uprising, the synagogue was there, accessible to anyone. This is what I saw when I was there, and this struck me more than anything else. And really, it really touched me deep inside. Now, the Secretary General of the Arab League said very clearly that the Arab Spring is paving the way to a summer and an autumn full of uncertainties, full of questions, full of open questions. And will these caretaker governments be able to organize the transition of these countries to a genuine model of democracy, transparency, rule of law? Will those young people be able to understand the political importance of their own revolution? Yes or no? These are obviously key questions that are true for countries that Italy consider friends, that have a privileged partnership with Italy, that have had it for years, not only because we are the first economic partner, but also because, and here I'd like to mention the case of Egypt, we have a millennium-long history together. We have a culture that ever since the beginning of times ties Italy to Egypt, so that we can say we, the Italians, we feel we have a direct interest for a new Egypt based on democracy, a democracy in when extremism is no longer exists, and where all the parts of society are respected, and where those girls that I saw on Tahrir Square can play a role as women at the center of society, of the Egyptian society of the future. And also allow me to say, therefore, as Christian, where the Christians of Egypt will have the freedom of professing their faith in any circumstances. This is a strong will that we would like to express. And then for Libya, there again we have a common history, painful history of colonialism. I know that we hurt the Libyan people, but we have a treaty of friendship between the Libyan people and the Italian people. So we were able to remedy the mistakes of the past. We put an end to this very painful past. Italy apologized not only to the dictator but also to the entire Libyan people, to the many generations of victims of that colonialism. And nowadays we have a moral obligation to be close to this new Libya. Sometimes it makes me smile when I see on newspapers now there is a race between Italy and France to conquer Libya. I mean, we've always been in Libya as Italians, and we are not competing with anyone. We'll attempt to be, for Libya, what we've always attempted to be, a serious and genuine friend, helping the Libyan people whenever they are in distress, and also helping them to grow in their rights, in their democracy, and in their economic development. We firmly believe that the agreements that we have drafted, that we have reached with the caretaker government of the new Libya will be the pillar supporting the joint efforts between Italy and Libya. And then I would like to mention Tunisia, beautiful country, very close to Italy. It's a very short journey to Tunisia, but also many desperate people fleeing from poverty. And I will dwell on this in a moment. But when we in Tunisia, when we say that we have a moral obligation to help Tunisia to overcome the crisis as quickly as possible, the first steps have already been taken. This implies economic commitment, cultural commitment, political commitment, in general a commitment to help Tunisia to flourish and develop itself. But there is a moot point, there is a difficult point that has to do with the situation in Syria. In Syria, we've seen tanks of the regime firing on civilians, innocent civilians. And we've seen maybe the most ruthless face of the government. We've heard that there's been an exchange with the West. You can guarantee stability to this regime. It's a laissez-faire policy, and we will continue to guarantee the stability of the entire Middle East, which lies in the interest of us all. So, and as Nabil al-Arabi said, our response to this will always be a very firm response. Either human basic rights are safeguarded unconditionally wherever they are violated, or we have no interest. We won't ever be involved in this game. We can't possibly be looking at all this without an international mechanism of sanctions, of proper sanctions, forcing the international isolation of this regime, which, until it will eventually promote reforms, it can certainly, under any circumstance, be a partner of any democratic country. We must be firm on this. No concessions. Because Italy has been the first country to recall its ambassadors in Damascus, and somebody frowns at this and say, how is this possible? You recalled your ambassador. What? Yes, because we had never thought that the moment that the tank started firing on civilians in the streets of Damascus, that our ambassador had to be there close to the office of the dictatorship. We thought that it wasn't a good idea for Italy to be there, present on the spot. And this is a very difficult point. This is really a critical point. I know that the Arab League are deeply committed to find a solution to this, to try and guarantee the full compliance with human rights. Now, what can we expect for the future after the Arab Spring? I think that the most important factor now is to find to focus on the role of human beings within these uprisings. I think that if there's something in common, if there is like a red thread connecting all of these Arab revolutions to each other, this common factor is the dignity of the human being, the dignity of its values, its aspirations. And I think that the right of everyone to participate fully in the public life, to enjoy fundamental rights, to enjoy economic development, this, I think, is the objective, the most important focus that we'll have to concentrate our activities on, to support all the young people that are protesting, that are taking to the streets, and to all caretaker governments that give voice to these aspirations. And once again, if you allow me, there's again something that is very dear to me. While concentrating on the importance of the human beings, we have to turn to our friends of the southern flank of the Mediterranean, reminding them that the freedom of religion must be a fundamental freedom, a fundamental right for these new governments and for the ones that are forthcoming. Now, looking back at the Arab revolutions and reflecting on them, it is certainly true that in these countries the credibility of the future has to do a lot, my dear Tarak and my dear Professor Farouq, on the challenge that these countries will be able to win with reference to the role of women. I mean, far too often we've been talking about the role of women in the Arab world. We started talking about it when, in cooperation with our friends, to establish the pillars that they determined for the Afghan constitution or the Iraqi constitution, for instance. We're very much in favor of the introduction in those constitutions of the principle of equality, same rights and full respect for women. I think that a very strong wind of freedom, of liberty in Northern Africa will have to lead to the same acknowledgement of rights for women in the new constitutions of these Arab countries. The acknowledgement of a positive role for women would be highly desirable and would make up for all the suffering of the Egyptian women that I met on Square Tahrir, some of them with their face covered, others were not covered, but requesting the same thing: dignity, equality, and a role in society. I think this is again a central point that on which we have to work hard, with respect, without imposing anything, and with friendships for our Arab friends on the southern flank of the Mediterranean. And then, if I may, I would like to say something on growth and economic development. There cannot possibly be a success for these Arab revolutions unless they go hand in hand with revival of their economies. Without growth, I had mentioned Marshall Plan for the Mediterranean a long time ago already. I had launched this idea. I mean, I've had at least some feedback. A few millions on the part of an institution, of financial institution have arrived, but more is needed. I think we need a shared plan internationally, also followed by Europe. In Europe, we are more than proud to be able to help flourishing countries with the desire to develop. And of course, we are more than ready to cooperate with countries of the southern flank of the Mediterranean if we want to prosper together along the Mediterranean. So let's resume those negotiations, those meetings, the opportunities that are offered to the SMEs. Let us give to the young people on the southern flank of the Mediterranean the ability to find a response to their desperation, to their appeal to overcome poverty. I think this could be the second point in our list where the energy of the international community should be focusing. And then another pillar, again taking into account the human beings and the importance of dialogue, especially intercultural dialogue, interreligious dialogue. Now, and I start with myself, but also for all Europeans, I think we should be brave and we shouldn't slow down. I don't think we should be scared. We shouldn't be afraid simply because we haven't had all the responses that we were expecting. Let's invest in these young people, young men and young women who have paid a very high cost, also sometimes with their own lives, for their freedom. So we shouldn't be afraid. I think we should be ready to fight, and let's work jointly together to, start our relationship with that area in a completely new way. I think what we need is a new humanism, so a new human face to these far-reaching changes, but not something that comes from the leadership, from the institutions and the governments, but on the contrary, a movement that starts bottom up. It is a moral duty to encourage this movement. And this is not just a moral appeal. This is the joint interest of us all. Because Professor Farouq, I think the most destabilizing factor of the southern flank of the Mediterranean would take place if those young people who have fought so hard would see that there are no fruits of the revolution, no benefits. In that case, I think instability would generate, and the very subtle recall of terrorism could gain ground, and they could believe in the fact that only a theocratic approach would rescue them. So, and there, we as Europe, we would be in serious trouble. That's why I think that we need a strong approach, and we have to be ready to take up the challenge. For a country like Italy, I think we have to look back at our history, millennium-long history. This is nothing new for us Italians. It's more than natural for us to look at Tunisia, Libya, Egypt. It's something that our ancestors did many years ago, many generations ago. I think we have to be in compliance, in line with the laws. We have to comply with this legislation, but we shouldn't be afraid of welcoming these people, integrating these people, assimilating these people. So if they come to our countries to work in compliance with Italian legislation, they should feel at home. Because, mind you, for them it is neither easy nor beautiful to escape their country, leave Tunisia and Egypt behind them and look for fortune in Europe. But as long as they comply with our rules, with our legislation, then we have to keep in mind that we're always dealing with people, with persons. So as long as they comply with the rules and legislation, as long as they comply with our principles, I think that if we welcome them properly, if we are generous to them, we will be much more stronger in defending our own identity and our own values. We won't be weaker, by no means. On the contrary, we'll be stronger. And I'm telling you this because I've always advocated the defense of Christian minorities, so I feel that I have the right to advocate exactly as I go and defend the rights of the Christians around the world, and I can advocate the rights of those who are escaping from despair to a proper and decent welcome in our countries. Otherwise, we call ourselves Christians, but then we aren't Christians, so we have to be serious in this. We have to behave as Christians. Otherwise, for this, and then I gradually move to my conclusion. For the same reason, we have to be strong when dealing with those countries where fundamental rights are not guaranteed, are not warranted. My dear friends, we are here in Rimini talking about this very moment. There are around the world millions of Christians which by law are not able to profess their religion. There are Christians that have to hold religious ceremonies in the underground, or they cannot do it in public because this is not allowed by the local laws. So we're here talking about welcoming these people, integrating them, being open to them, but then we have to say clearly, and we have to start telling countries with which we have cooperation agreements, tell them that what our idea is, whereby every human person must be able to, must enjoy freedom of religion, and this cannot be denied simply because there is a law which doesn't allow for this. And laws of the state sometimes are weaker if compared to the law which we have inside of us, which is the law which is at the basis of the freedom of religion. So in conclusion, I would like to say that the Arab Spring is certainly a challenge for the West. It is a challenge for we as Europeans, for us as Europeans, and for us as Italians. We have a long-standing history of democracy, a long-standing history of culture and tradition, whereby we are a natural bridge. And may I say this with a sense of pride, and I think we are by far the best in this. Thank you. And second to none.
Bene. Non voglio... Mi spiace di dover interrompere il giusto.
I'm very sorry I'm interrupting this warm applause to Minister Frattini for the important things he said, but time is short and I wish to give the floor straight to Tarak Ben Ammar. I greatly appreciate to hear a member of the government of this country so much in harmony with his faith and with the politics of as led on behalf of the Italian people. Well, these wise words should be taken up by many other politicians in Italy and elsewhere. I find it difficult to take the floor after Minister Franco Frattini. You probably agree with that. This morning, Minister Frattini was awarded a prize for the religious dialogue and for tolerance. And I believe that he really deserves such an award. He carried out a very difficult action in Tunisia on very controversial issues. I'm no politician myself. I'm no university professor. I am an entrepreneur in the industry of culture, and as a Muslim, today, in the holy month for the Muslims, a month where you have to ask for pardon, where you have to make sacrifice and to show act of tolerance, because Islam, as Christianity, is a peaceful religion, unlike the minority of people that use Islam to wage war. I'm very familiar with the meeting, and I have been for 32 years. I met many of the people who came here, and the more I got to know the persons who came here, the belittled I felt. And existence becomes an immense uncertainty. Well, each of us might think, what does this mean? Well, each of us will probably give his or her own interpretation. Well, to start with, seeing over 4,000 young people who devote their summer holidays to contribute for free to this event is showing itself of this desire to give and not to receive all the time. I was raised in a family where I was told, never ask. First you give, and then God will decide, Allah will decide what you're going to receive. I was born to a Muslim family, but to a mother who was born a Catholic. And I was raised again in the tolerance of all religions. I was only a superficial Muslim, as I knew only little about the Catholic religion. I'm stating as much because I believe that personal experience, funnily, tells us about who that person is. So that's why I'm talking about myself. At 13, I went to school. I was sent to the priest, the only Muslim student in the Catholic Church. My friends, my Muslim friends, told me, beware, they're going to try and convert you. Well, I had no fears. I was curious. I wanted to learn about this beautiful religion of Christ. And I recall that on Sunday morning, my friends would tell me, lucky you don't have to get up to go to service. As a child, I was an early bird, and I felt a bit ashamed of sleeping in, so I would go together with my schoolmates to church. I was along the Via Aurelia, where the Vatican television was, and I was hiding a bit because I knew nothing about the Catholic religion, so I was a bit shy. There was a cross at the end of the church. That was Christ, and that cross was, in a way, looking at me. I felt like somebody was asking me, what are you doing here? You remember that ad that was broadcast by Rai, then that was done away with because that was cancelled because there was a bit of a racist ad, and there was Calimero, this cartoon, who would say, you're not black, you're just dirty. And so I felt like the little Calimero, like the little dirty bird, and that actually marked my future career because one of the priests there saw that I was a bit shy. When they would pray, there were certain movements to make. Would stand and sit according to what other people were saying. And this priest asked me, "Are you curious about religion?" And I said, "Yes." And he taught me my religion, Judaism and Catholicism, and I was very much fascinated by that. Many years after school, I decided to study cinema. I was in love with Italian cinema, and the first director I met was Roberto Rossellini, and he wanted to make a movie, The Messiah. So, you see, just by chance, my first movie was The Messiah, and I basically had in mind the kind of religion that priest had taught me. I didn't want to make any mistakes when I was producing a film on the Messiah. That film was shot in Tunisia. And we shot the movie, the strongest scenes in a Muslim country, with the crucifixion, the Passion of Christ. And we were making the shooting in the great mosque of Kairouan, and the mosque of Kairouan is very important. Like going 4 times to the mosque in Kairouan is as going to the Mecca. In this very tolerant country, the first president, Bourguiba, in Tunisia, respected the right of free religion for the Coptic Catholic people. And Tunisia was a democratic country, and we could shoot the film. So then I also worked and I produced another movie by Zeffirelli, Jesus Christ. The lead actor was acting as a rabbi because I myself did not know that Jesus was a rabbi. And other American friends with the Passion of Christ, another friend that I produced and distributed as a Muslim by myself against everybody else. And many learned about these things. And I was wondering, how come that I, as a Muslim, was chosen to work in Muslim, Jesus Christ, the Bible, the Passion of Christ, Saint Peter, Mother Teresa, Saint Paul, John Paul II. With Ettore Bernabei, a gentleman that helped me when I was working at the Jesus of Nazareth. I thought that was a destiny. As a Muslim, I believe that a road is paved for us by God, and it is up to us to follow that way forward or to deviate from it. But the fact that the existence becomes an immense certainty made me think about it, because I am sure that I was chosen as a Muslim. And I recall that when I went to defend The Passion of Christ by Mel Gibson, who, thanks to the Holy Father, whom I had the honor to meet, actually saw The Passion of Christ, because Mel Gibson was attacked anti-Semitic director. Then the film was not against a Jewish, but there was a sentence written on the internet, and there was a sentence that was against this man, and with the little sentence with the social network, you can destroy men. I went to the French TV because the film wouldn't find any cinema theater to be distributed. In Italy, it was easy to have the film distributed, but in France, they didn't want The Passion of Christ by Mel Gibson. I couldn't find any theater there, and the Catholic Church in France didn't support us because Mel Gibson was charged for anti-Jewish attitude. I wasn't helped even by the Hebrew minorities that attacked me in the court. So I went to the TV before tens of thousands of Frenchmen, and they were very surprised seeing a Muslim defending that movie. And that's why I told them, you didn't understand the thing. Christ in the Quran, and we trust in Christ and Maria. Well, the Muslim don't see Christ as a son of God. The Trinity is a very difficult concept, not just for Muslims. But Muhammad is a prophet, and Christ was one of the most important prophets for him. In a month, I'm going to start a movie on Maria in Tunisia, on Mary, and all these movies have been made in Islamic countries with young Tunisians, and after 35 years of career and 60 movies, I would recall that sentence that that priest had told me. He was showing me the speech of an important American president stating, don't always try to ask what is given to you in your country, but try and ask yourself what you can do to your country. The 4,000 young people who are working here do that on an everyday basis, and Minister Frattini is doing likewise. So irrespective of the job we do try all to do something for our country rather than asking from our country. I produced films with Zeffirelli, Monicelli, Tornatore, and I could go on quoting other Italian directors and Italian crews that taught my young co-workers, and 950,000 jobs were created in the industry of culture. In this conference, we're talking about the dialogue between different religions, tolerance and peace. Talking about it is certainly very interesting, but doing something for that is even more. When we distributed The Passion of Christ, that was the only movie. There's a tradition in Islam, it is not written down in the Quran, whereby you couldn't see images of God or of prophets. I distributed the movie by Mel Gibson throughout the Arab countries, and that wasn't censored. Palestinians saw that as if it belonged to them, so each Arab man saw in the pain of Christ, in the suffering of Christ, in the passion of Christ, something of themselves. And Mel Gibson would say, why do you want to make this film with me? And I said, I liked what you said. You said that men caused violence to be perpetrated against the most innocent man, And the first genocide was just then. It was only afterwards that other genocides took place. And I really appreciated this sense of justice. How is it possible for a man to make another man suffer for an innocent man? And yet, this is what we see on an everyday basis with civil wars, wars at large in Africa, with the vengeance. So I was wondering, what can I do for the Arab world, apart from making movies? 2 years ago, I decided to start a TV station that was based on tolerance and interreligious dialogue. Nesma is the name of the TV. The Nesma stands for breeze. You know, you like the breeze when it's hot. Each of us would appreciate some breeze today, as it's so hot. And I wanted my TV station to be based in Tunisia, so as to have the North Africa, the 90 million people, inhabitants of North Africa, apart from Egypt, living in North Africa. And this was I wanted to be my audience. So there are 11 million in Libya, Morocco 39, Mauritania 35, and so on and so forth. And there are over 20 million North Africans that live abroad, France and elsewhere. They have a language which is not Arabic, is Maghreb Arabic. So I was wondering, who should I make this TV with? And I decided that it was to be the Italians, because the Italians are the Arabs of the North. This is how I conceive of Italians. You have to know that television is very important. 65% of the population in these countries is younger than 25. And who's talking to them? What are their ideals for their lives? In the West, they spend 3.5 hours before the TV. In the Arab region, 6 hours. So it's very important communicator. Franco Frattini paid me the honor to come and talk at my TV station, and my TV station became #1. It was indeed a TV station of the religion, and I wish to conclude stating that the man who killed himself, Muhammad Bouazizi, didn't want to die because in Islam, killing oneself is prohibited. He wanted to hurt himself so as to get access to our hearts, to our indifference, to our selfishness. I'm sure of that, because his family is the object of my future work. I'm preparing work on that. He was chosen by God to touch our hearts. And that week, my TV station on December 29th held a talk show against the regime, with Ben Ali regime still on in Tunisia. So my managers risked being arrested. And that TV became the TV of freedom. Today, thanks to this freedom of young people, and by the way, Minister Frattini is right, because young people demonstrated in Tunisia and Egypt, and they were asking for dignity, work, freedom and work. If there are no jobs, then you're hungry and your ear doesn't heed anything about freedom. As for Tunisia, I can tell you that we were the first to make the woman free. In 1958, after the independence that we were granted in 57, we granted women the right to divorce, the right to own properties. 60% of young people are women attending universities. We do set the example in the Arab world. Exactly because there's this freedom of women, I have no fear of those who believe that Muslim extremism is going to prevail on the Arab youth. The Arab youth know to be Muslims, as you know how to be Catholic and democratic at the same time. The Arab youth will never accept dictatorship anymore, be that religious or secular. This is perhaps a dream, this is perhaps my desire, but we have to help them so as to provide them with the means to find jobs, and not to be forced to flee, to fly, to escape, to run away from their country and come to you and look for jobs. Oil in Libya, oil in Algeria, and in Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, Iraq, Bahrain. Can it be possible for poverty to exist in the Arab world? No way. Could it be possible that young people are ready to drown when we have the wealth and that God has given to us? So social justice, the division of wealth, this is the real work ahead for the new governments. Young men in Tunisia, young men in Egypt, they can enjoy the same well-being as there is in Europe. There's no reason for the Arab continent to be poor when the peoples have been given the richness of oil deposits. Thank you very much for your kind attention, and I apologize for taking up too much of your time. Thank you.
A volte il ruolo di moderatore è un po' antipatico perché si vorrebbe stare molto a lungo a ascoltare le persone.
Thank you very much. This long applause bears witness to the importance of your contribution. I'm sorry I had to interrupt you. We have to go on. We have to go on with our meeting. We're now going to hear the charming Arab language because our friend Wael is going to talk in Arabic after saying a few words in Italian, and we're very pleased that we could hear for Wael here at the meeting. So without further ado, I'd like to give him the floor.
Buonasera. Desidero
Good evening. I wish to thank you using the language which is dearest to my heart. I wish to express my happiness in being before you in my capacity as the Vice President of the meeting Cairo. Two months before the revolution, this meeting took place in Cairo thanks to you and your friendship. And this has been an opportunity for me to experience the most important values that were achieved in the revolution: liberty, beauty, and unity.
كلمة الاستقرار أكثر المفردات.
The word stability has been one of the words recurring most often in the speeches by President Mubarak, as stability was the most important objective of the system. Egyptians have to sacrifice their freedoms and their rights to stability. Egyptians have to coexist for over 50 years with the martial law. And the descendants of the pharaohs had to live their lives as their predecessors did as mummies in the coffins of stability. Every new idea, every legitimate aspiration, every wish for change was interpreted as a threat to stability. Stability was nothing but some kind of hibernation, a mental stagnation, where the Egyptians had been living with time that had come to stop, where action was cancelled. Because of this stability, contradicting liberty and rights, that the process of modernization and Arab Renaissance came to a halt and got wasted. And the Arab reason lost its authenticity, and the Arab man became totally alien to the surrounding reality. The concepts that are used in the modern Arab discourse do not reflect any of the modern Arab reality. Such concepts have often been taken from European thinking, referring to a reality already underway on being arrived at. All the concepts were drawing from the medieval Arab Islamic thinking. In both cases, such concepts were used to express indefinite reality. But that was darkened or hidden by this or that ideal image that was present in the conscience and in the Arab memories. Hence the breaking up of the relationship between thought and its object.
بشكل عام أسير النماذج الأصلية.
The intellectual Arab is often a prisoner of the original models of the golden ages. And this is true both for those sticking to the tradition and for those promoting modernity, because they all believe in what is just but wishful thinking. The supporters of old tradition would like to go back to the time of the Prophet and to the time of the caliphs, or they would like to go back to the realism or the rationalism or the realism of Khaldun or the model of al-Satani. But modernists on their side would like to go back to the Renaissance of the Enlightenment, imitating Descartes methodology or Voltaire liberalism or Kant rationalism or Hegel historicism or Marx materialism.
سببه الرئيسي والأهم أنه غير فاعل في
This is due to this suffering of the Arab man has to do with the fact that its relations with a different reality was fundamental to create the human identity, thus finding that harmony that had been lost between the present and the past, between the now and the surrounding space. The crisis of the Arab reason is in crisis because it doesn't find harmony between time and man, and cannot find an agreement between them. Fundamentalists lived in the place and not only as emigrants from the present. So they live in the present, but they are away with their mind and the place where their heart are displaced and where they would like to move to the West. So to despise the human dignity and the respective rights and freedoms in the name of stability is the real threat to stability itself. Because besides shattering and smashing, destroying society, the individual himself is shattered and the entire human being.
الحكومات الغربية الاستبداد
Many Western governments, in the name of this stability, have forgotten that if you are tolerant, you are involved in the crime, and this is a dangerous attitude if you are unable to understand that the interest of the entire people implies a good contribution for the prevalence of the rights of the human being and the fulfillment of the freedoms. This is the greatest support that can be given to the new democracy is to apply the values of the Western civilizations unconditionally, because the challenge that is related to the current Arab Spring is not of economic nature or political nature, but rather a moral and cultural challenge. Yes, it is moral, because the Egyptian revolution has been an experiment. It clearly demonstrated that believing in the best human values is very powerful, something that cannot be defeated. So it is not unrealistic to talk today about moral principle, and it's not a contradiction to reality. It's been seen that millions of Egyptians took to the street to protest against the most oppressing state and the most authoritarian regime of the region. They firmly believed in their own rights and their own freedoms. A lot has been written on this Egyptian revolution about the poverty, the misery, the oppression, and the acts of violence which led to this outburst of rage of the people beyond every limit. But I myself, as an Egyptian, and I've known the previous period, I know very well that the real motive, the reason, is believing in one's own potentials, the ability to change, and also believing in freedom and justice. The Egyptians believed in this, in freedom, in the ability to change, and in justice. This allowed the defeat of millions of police officers, and this regime collapsed in 18 days because this time.
أو حزبا أو أيديولوجية، بل كان يواجه الإنسانية وإرادة جمعية.
And this is the it's a new reality where oppression, terrorism, mystification of reality no longer functions. There's nothing to negotiate about. The Egyptians firmly believed in their right to freedom, and the fundamental thing to live in reality is faith. But now, how did everything happen? Now, in the 6 years prior to the revolution, the Egyptians had organized more than 3,000 strikes and demonstrations, and there were protests on the part of judges, workers, university teachers, students, teachers, civil servants, and journalists. And moreover, the inhabitants of many neighborhoods in Cairo and in the villages blocked the streets and public transport as a sign of protest against the terrible conditions of life. Politically, they founded a movement called Kifaya in 2004, including outstanding public figures and members of the opposition. And for the first time in the history of Egypt, a movement was able to criticize the president and reject its rule. or leave the power in the hands of the fact that power could be left in the hands of their son. These actions strengthen the cult of revolution in the conscience of the Egyptian, and this, in my opinion, makes the revolution different from any other revolution in the world. This helps to preserve the dynamism and the effectiveness to continue to fight against obstacles that might prevent the way to block the way to democracy. Anyway, nobody tells the revolution is the outcome of all of these actions. Revolution that we are talking about is not the ideological outcome or product, because this has nothing to do with lay secular philosophies, and also it's not in the religious book or in the ethical or Said or Khomeini, or the nothing to do with with God or the Islamic covenant, or also ideological reference to Taher Tizini, Nasr Hamad Abu Zaid, or the revolutions. What was the moment on which led to this splendid revolution? The reply to this question will take us to the second challenge, that is to say, the cultural challenge. A new actor comes to the world, the digital and communication human being. The scenario of the world has gone through a transformation in the instrument, the concept, the values, and in its powers. Moreover, the relationship of man with the various aspects of his own existence change. One of these aspects is the transformation of the relationship with reality, because we've entered the digital area, and in the age of electronic, as a society of information, there is a new relational society, virtual and media-based. This extraordinary reality, which is very quick, which is more intense, which is maybe more truest than the reality, one is unable to manage things, and you're unable to do anything without using equipment and networks and the internet and code and content that travel very quickly. This is what makes the Egyptian revolution a cultural transformation which is unique. It has been the first event of this type in the entire world, breaking all barriers between the traditional reality and the virtual world. To be more precise, it's been the first event which has built bridges between two worlds. The real scenario was a continuous interaction between two worlds. The events which started with a young man was killed by the police, and the reaction of this virtual world then pushed another young man, Wael, to open a page on Facebook whose title it is "We Are All Khaled." That is the name of the young man killed by the police. And in less than a month, this page had more than 650,000 supporters. It was the first time in the modern history of Egypt that such a huge number of people are able to engage in a dialogue, to listen, to react all together. And then there was the end of the Mubarak regime and the beginning of a new phase, a reality where the people can attempt every day to free himself from restraints of time and place. So by reflecting on the events of the revolution, this is even more true. A new human existence which had been denied by the dictatorship so a new phase for the young people. The killing of hundreds of people defending Tahrir Square was able to defend that symbolic space through the exaltation of that place. And therefore, a limited surface like Square Tahrir in Egypt becomes a huge place of existence and human actions. And moreover, during the days of the revolution, the names of certain places have been deliberately changed to giving them new names so that the idea was to get rid of the dictatorship. The idea was to tell dictatorship, disappear, go away, we are now the owners of our time and of our places. One of the most telling evidence of this transformation is the liberation of the Arab brain of the dream of the oppressive dictator. Many criticized the revolution, telling the world that there was no leader. But millions of men and women took to the streets, guided by their faith and by their belief in freedom, after they had understood that their strength was related to their unity. Some millions of people. Just like in the virtual world, a page that is so strong, a page is so strong because of the number of the people who become supporters.
هناك الكثير من الأشياء التي تجعلنا نشعر بالفوق اليوم. Guardando questo massiccio, لأني عندما أرى علم مصر يرتفع في قلب quando vedo la bandiera d'Egitto innalzata in Tel Aviv, guardando questa massiccia presenza qui, voi oggi.
Looking at all of you, looking how many people you are, then I am full of hope. I'm full of hope because this meeting is absolutely free, no prejudice, solid foundation. This meeting changed my life, changed my own personal life. One of the most important moments for the Egyptian revolution, because the meeting between the various members so when the Egyptians took to the street to protect their houses and their families, this made all fears disappear. And this makes me think about Giussani. The power, the strength that changed the heart of the people is the same, which can change the history of the world. Thank you very much. I've understood that the heart of the people is able to contain all the world and becomes an immense certainty. Thank you very much. So it's very late. I think a very significant event for the Rimini meeting. We have found a new friend. Very interesting, listen to the story of his life. And then important points that we will have to work on. The one indicated by Minister Frattini, another very dear friend of the meeting. Maybe next time we will all meet in Cairo at the meeting organized by its Vice President Wael Farouq. Thank you very much.